Jivo yasyanugo deho bhutendriya manomaya tannirodosya maranam avirbhavastu sambhava. To sambhava. Syanugo deho bhutendriya manomaya tanirodosya maranam vibhavastu sambhava. Oh yasyanugo deho bhutendriya manomaya tannirodosya maranam avirbhavastu sambhava. To go by Manomaya Syamaranam Avirbhavastu sambhava. Jiva, the living entity, he indeed, asya, of him, anuga, suitable, deha, body, bhuta, gross material elements, indriya, senses, mana, mind, maya, made of, tat, of the body, nirodha, distraction, asya, of the living entity, maranam, death, avirbhava, manifestation, to, but, sambhava, birth. Translation. In this way, the living entity gets a suitable body with a material mind and senses according to his fruitive activities. When the reaction of his particular activity comes to an end, that end is called death. And when a particular type of reaction begins, that beginning is called birth. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. From time immemorial, the living entity travels in the different species of life and the different planets, almost perpetually. This process is explained in Bhagavad Gita, Brahmayan sarva bhutani yantrarudani mayaya, Bhagavad Gita 1861. Under the spell of Maya, everyone is wandering throughout the universe on the carriage of the body offered by the material energy. Materialistic life involves a series of actions and reactions. It is a long film spool of reactions and reactions, and one lifespan is just a flash in such a reactionary show. When a child is born, it is to be understood that his particular type of body is the beginning of another set of activities. And when an old man dies, it is to be understood that one set of reactionary activities is finished. We can see that because of different reactionary activities, one man is born in a rich family and another is born in a poor family. although both of them are born in the same place at the same moment and in the same atmosphere. One who is carrying pious activity with him is given a chance to take his birth in a rich or pious family, and one who is carrying impious activity is given a chance to take birth in a lower, poor family. The change of body means a change to a different field of activities. Similarly, when the body of the boy changes into that of a youth, the boyish activities change into youthful activities. It is clear that a particular body is given to the living entity for a particular type of activity. This process is going on perpetually from a time which is impossible to trace out. Vaishnav poets say, therefore, anadi karma pale, which means that these actions and reactions of one's activity cannot be traced, for they may even continue from the last millennium of Brahma's birth to the next millennium. We have seen the example in the life of Narada Muni. In one millennium, he was the son of a maidservant, and in the next millennium, he became a great sage. Jivo yasyanugo deho bhutendriya manomaya tan nirodos yamaranam avirbhavas tu sambhava. In this way, the living entity gets a suitable body with a material mind and senses according to his fruitive activities. When the reaction of his particular activity comes to an end, that end is called death. And when a particular type of reaction begins, that beginning is called birth. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Niravishesha Shunyavadi Paschitya Deshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasani Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalptarubhyascha kripas sindubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So devotees, our lengthy discussion we've been going through for weeks now about the fates of different living entities at the end of their last lives, and then the situations they're then put into, preparing for the next life and then actually in the next life, and what they go through in the next life, and the pitfalls they become faced with, as we were just reading at some length and detail about the potential problems, not just potential really, but the problems to be encountered in the next life. You went through the last life and you ended up in hot water. Well, even literally, perhaps. Just you ended up in some hellish situation. This is very, it's not universal, but it's very typical. It's very typical. Yeah, I was studying the verses in this chapter, and some other related ones. And the thing is that in terms of pitfalls, obviously what we were discussing at length was the pitfalls involved in the relationships between the sexes in the human form of life. And it really appears clear that unless one does something really Krishna conscious, And even then, you got to really stick at it. But what's going to happen, basically, more or less to everyone, is they're going to end up going to hell again. Yes. It really seems like that. In fact, Srila Prabhupada did make a point like that. At least what Srila Prabhupada said in this particular case was that unless people now on this planet, the people we see and who are sharing this time with us on this planet, Prabhupada made it quite clear that unless these people really get some Krishna consciousness in substantial and meaningful ways, Prabhupada made it quite clear they're all going to go to hell. And it's quite understandable if one observes how they live. Yes. What did I read some weeks ago? The Duke of Edinburgh died, whenever it was, not long ago. And I read something about it, I think, what was it, that the next day, or maybe at the end of the funeral, something like that, like really connected with the funeral, a special luncheon was served for whoever the elites in the royal circles. And so I was just glancing at it, and I saw the Queen ate. Actually I can't remember the exact details, but really rotten, terrible things at the special luncheon. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Maybe it was rabbit something, and some other type of, living entity, and not a vegetable, something else. And you look at it, and this is how they're living every day. And when you've lived like that every day, a couple of meals a day, or 2 or 3, when you've lived like that for just, the Queen's almost 100, but every day, 365 days a year times 100 is what, 36,000 days, and you've eaten a couple of times a day like that, means 70,000 times you've eaten these types of meals. Of course, most people don't live to 100, but even if you just live to 70 or 80, which is more normal, then how many 50,000 times you've eaten like that? Now, what do you expect? What could be expected in terms of a future? Particularly if you read the last chapter of the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's extreme. Now, of course, Her Majesty Elizabeth R., or whatever, she has met devotees. She's met devotees on a number of occasions. And as I understand, she even attended the arti at the Avanti school in northwest London. And they have deities on the altar, and she was there, for like half an hour, whatever it is, with kirtan going on and seeing the deities. So she had some contact with Krishna consciousness, but otherwise, if you just consider in terms of the laws of material nature and how the vast majority of people live and what the reactions are for living like that, and it's not just diet, but, the intoxication, the illicit sex life, these things particularly, some gambling perhaps in different ways, but particularly meat eating, intoxication, and illicit sex. You can understand what Prabhupada means. That unless people really have some contact with Krishna consciousness, these very people, if we just look out the window right now, we'll probably see some, they're going to hell. And that's really not nice. It's really, really, really horrific. So, anyway, so here the system is being described that, and it's a very interesting description actually, that the living entity gets a suitable body in terms of his or her previous activities. Then, according to the way Prabhupada describes it here, Prabhupada says, materialistic life involves a series of actions and reactions. It is a long film spool of actions and reactions, and one lifespan is just a flash in such a reactionary show. Some long movie. You know, maybe your average movie is an hour and a half, or sometimes a couple of hours. I don't think, well, I guess you get these serials, right, that go on and on. But here we're talking about really long, not just a couple of hours, and not just like some serial which goes on an hour a day for a few years. But this is really long. So, in that long film spool of actions and reactions, in which one lifespan is just a flash, just a very small section of a long the whole thing. The way Prabhupada puts it is that when a child is born, it is to be understood that he is beginning another set, a set of activities. And when the same child now, after some years, becomes elderly and the time of death comes, then the set finishes. That's understandable, isn't it? You're born with a particular body, which has a particular nature, and in many ways at least, that basic nature stays during the course of your life, even as you grow up. I mean, particularly a male body, a female body. So you're sort of, that's the set. That's part, like a very fundamental part of the set, the male type, or the female type, or the racial type. These things, to a large degree, are fixed, to a large degree. The intelligence, some are more intelligent, some are less. As I read many years ago, and it sort of struck me in an amusing but accurate way, that about 50% of the people are of less than average intelligence. Did you get that? It's a very simple little thing. Yes. So you have your intellectual capacity, and maybe you can work on it in some ways, but just some people are prone to be sharper than others, and it tends to stick like that. And some people are slower, or there are different types of intelligence. Some people are on the mathematical side. Some people are on the literary side, or the, different sides in terms of intellect. I read some years ago, I read that Einstein, who of course is famous for his scientific type of intellect, but that was his type of intellect, and other types of intellect which other people who are not scientifically minded, but he didn't have. So I read years ago that sometimes when Einstein would go out for a walk, he would have to somehow telephone home to get them to come and pick him up, because he would get lost and he wouldn't remember how to get back. That's what I read. Yeah. So, sets. People enter a lifetime with a particular set of karmic circumstances in terms of body type, gross body type, subtle body type, even in terms of association, the social environment in which one is born. So these are like sets. And so it's not just haphazard, which makes sense, of course. If it was haphazard, you're thrown one day into one situation, the next day into a totally different situation, and the day after that, a completely different situation. It would be a bit extraordinary, wouldn't it? But there's a type of consistency to some degree, not absolutely, but a type of consistency in the circumstances that people face during the course of their lives. And at least the way Prabhupada expresses here, that when a child is born, it's to be understood that his particular type of body is the beginning of another set of activities. And then born and then dies, and then born into a different situation in which a different set of activities or reactions, a different set of reactions are sort of gathered together and dumped on his head to deal with. And life is going on like that. It's, life in the material world. And, I read an interesting thing today. I looked at Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on this verse, and he said an interesting thing. He said that death means when the subtle body separates from the gross body. I thought that was very interesting. Yeah, because that's death. The gross body is done, but the subtle body is not done. The subtle body goes on. Yeah. And of course the subtle body, it mutates and changes in different ways, but still it's essentially the same subtle body, which is just transforming from childhood to youth to old age. First of all, the subtle body changes, but it's the same subtle body. It's the same subtle body, But as Srila Prabhupada explained, in terms of the change of body, a gross body in the course of this life, Prabhupada seems to have accepted the principle that some people, scientific type people, talk about, that every several years, every so often, every cell in the body changes. And so you literally get an actual different body every, sometimes they say 7 years, but something like that. It is actually a different body, in fact, even though it resembles the body several years before. Of course, some aging has taken place, but resemblance will be there. But actually it's a different body. It's actually a different body. I mentioned, I'm sure some of you would remember, every now and then I see these things which catch my mind. The example of Ned Kelly's gun, do you remember that one? Ned Kelly's gun. You're not familiar with Australian history too much, probably. But anyway, Ned Kelly was a famous Australian criminal, heavy gangster, in the sort of the early colonial days when they're just getting established. And yeah, he did a lot of things he shouldn't have done. And he had this special gun, and eventually they killed him. So, but the gun became a museum exhibit because, he's Ned Kelly. He's one of these, like really very famous characters in the history of the country. So, that was like 200 years ago or 150 at least that he was living. So they put his gun in the museum. But like anything, the gun deteriorated. First of all, if I remember correctly, the barrel just sort of, they had to replace the barrel because the original barrel just rusted or something. Then they had to replace the handle because it fell off or something like that. And then they had to replace the middle part. So what you got? You got a totally different gun. It's actually a different gun. It's just a different gun. But it's still in the museum with a thing saying Ned Kelly's gun. So, life in this world. So, the gross body, Prabhupada indeed talks about that within the set of this lifetime, where there's certain, common factors running through. But then there are subsets. And Prabhupada says, the change of body means a change to a different field of activities. Okay. Similarly, when the body of a boy changes into that of a youth, the boyish activities change into youthful activities. It's a different set. It's a subset within the greater set of that lifetime. Yes. So anyway, the changes of the gross body in Bhagavad Gita and, everywhere, this is emphasized so much. The changes of the gross body, and therefore how we shouldn't be attached to the gross body. The subtle body also changes, but it is the same subtle body. It's just transforming in different ways. It's not like, that at some point the subtle body is actually finished and you get an actually new one. No, it just changes shape. So yeah, I found that interesting. Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur said that death means the subtle body separates from the gross body, and the subtle body just goes on into a different future. They were together. In fact, he says, the way he puts it is that there's a real type of oneness during this life. The gross body and the subtle body, they sort of merge. They kind of merge. They become very much entwined with each other through the course of the life. And of course we know people identify. I am a this, I am a that, I'm intelligent, I'm not, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm big, I'm small. All these identities in terms of gross body and subtle body without understanding the difference. But death means the subtle body, they just separate, and the subtle body goes on, but the gross body just, that's it. So this is going on perpetually. It's going on perpetually while one is in this material world. And Srila Prabhupada makes a really interesting point at the end of the purport. Well, a particular body is given to the living entity for a particular type of activity. Anyway, that we already mentioned. You get a male body, and generally it's for male type activities of different, there are different variations, but there are male types of activities. And this is going on perpetually from a time which is impossible to trace out. Vaishnav poets say, therefore, anadi karma pale, which means the actions and reactions of one's activity cannot be traced, because they may even, this is really an important point, which Prabhupada mentions in a few places, but not many, but this is one. The actions and reactions of one's activity cannot be traced because they may even continue from the last millennium of Brahma's birth to the next millennium. Yeah. Last millennium of Brahma's birth, well, it could be just the day of Brahma, but it could mean the death of Brahma, and then into the next Brahma's life. And we've seen the example in the life of Narada. In one millennium, he was the son of a maidservant, and the next millennium, he became a great sage. And even if you remember, we just read it. Oh no, it was in our Srimad Bhagavatam seminar. We were reading this Narada Muni telling his life story, that he was the son of the maidservant. Then he became great devotee, and then his body died, but because of his elevated state of Krishna consciousness, when his gross body died, that time, in the lifetime of the son of the maidservant, then his spiritual body manifested. Just like lightning and illumination occur simultaneously, the verse said. And then he became the great sage. And then the end of Brahma's life came, and then the life of the next Brahma came, And he came as the same great sage from the end of the life of the previous Brahma. So the thing is, so this happens, that we were living in the life of the previous Brahma, and then that the life of the previous Brahma ended. We entered into Mahavishnu in the state they call Susupti, deep sleep, and then, as per the description in Brahma Samhita, we came out of Mahavishnu for the next millennium or lifetime of the next Brahma. And we ended up being placed into one of the universes by the arrangement of the Brahma. So, therefore, in that sense, Prabhupada's saying that you cannot trace the beginning of your time in material life. You cannot really say that it's been, X a million years or 10 million or whatever, because in between Brahmas, time as we know it stops. It's withdrawn, because time is an energy. Time is not just a sort of a constant feature of reality. Time as we know it is an energy, the Kala Shakti. And along with us, the Jiva Shakti, being withdrawn into Mahavishnu at the end of Brahma's life, the Kala Shakti is also withdrawn into Brahma, into Mahavishnu, and then comes out again when Mahavishnu glances over the material nature. So, therefore, you can't say that it was any particular number of years. So therefore, Prabhupada mentions this little part of a verse, Anadi Karma Pale. Anadi. Adi means beginning. Anadi means beginningless. Karma Pale, fruit of activity, materialistic activity. So it's been going on, and it can go on, or you can get out of it by changing to Krishna consciousness. Yes. Hare Krishna. Any comments, questions, words of wisdom? Mother Rukmini, anything?
I have a question that's from last night, but maybe a little bit.
Okay.
You were mentioning how Yashoda and Radharani, they don't have that marginal
Yeah.
characteristic, and therefore they never fall down. So I've always had this, inverted commas doubt, that then do they have free will? And then if they do, why would Krishna need to create the marginal energy? Why not create us all like that?
Well, okay, so the question is, last night we mentioned how Mother Yashoda and Radharani, they are not jiva souls. Radharani's in her own special category as the internal potency, the pleasure potency of the Lord. Mother Yashoda is a little different. Well, a little different. Let me just read it. Mother Yashoda, That exalted platform of prema is described by Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu as prema pamato mahan, and Mother Yashoda naturally acts in such an exalted position in loving affairs. She is therefore a Nitya Siddha devotee, an expansion of Krishna's Hladini potency. Did you read that last night? Or since? Oh. She's therefore a Nitya Siddha devotee, an expansion of Krishna's Hladini potency. His potency to enjoy transcendental bliss through expansions who are special devotees. Such devotees are not sadhana siddha. So the question is, at least first part, do such devotees have free will? And the answer is, why not? They're not machines. They have free will. Of course they have free will. But because of their nature, they have no tendency to utilize their free will in materialistic ways. We have the tendency, or the sort of built into our nature, the capacity, you could say, to misuse. They don't really have the capacity. They're just not inclined like that. Yeah.
Then the question is, then why? Why do we need to have that capacity?
So the question is, why do we need to? You know, what I was going to say is, when you get there, I think you should ask Krishna. If you want an authoritative answer, I can suggest something. I could suggest, because in a certain sense, it adds an element of interest to the situation. Yeah. You know, we hear sometimes that because there's a tendency to not serve Krishna, when we do serve Krishna, that is enhanced by the fact that we don't actually have to. We're doing it voluntarily. But it doesn't mean that when Mother Yashoda or Srimati Radharani, when they serve Krishna, it doesn't mean that they're not doing it voluntarily. It's just a different kind of sphere of voluntariness, something like that. Less hazardous. And why? Yeah, well, we said. You know, I imagine you remember there's the question the one devotee was asking Prabhupada, why? Well, the point was made, there's a discussion about picking Tulsi on Dwadasi, because there's a rule in Hari Bhakti Vilas that you don't pick Tulsi on Dwadasi. And devotee asked Prabhupada, why? And Hari Bhakti Vilas, of course, is Sanatana Goswami. And Prabhupada said, because Sanatana Goswami said so, you know, rather than, you know, because there's certain conditions in the atmosphere or whatever on Dwadasi which have certain effects or something, just because Sanatana Goswami said so. Yes.
Maharaj, I'm sure it's a dumb question, but in the material experience, we always experience that there is something and there's something beyond it. So I find it absolutely bewildering to understand that Krishna's creation is everything, there's nothing but it. Maharaj knows it. we always experience there's a star, there's something behind. So that the material, this creation, material and spiritual, it's everything and there's not further on something behind.
Well, you know, the material world, okay, the question I guess is that in material life there's always something, the next thing, sort of thing. But in Krishna's creation, there's nothing beyond, right? Yeah, there's nothing. There's the material creation, the spiritual creation. So what's next? Well, there's no next. That's it. Well, you know, I would say, first thing I'd say is that the material creation is so vast and variegated that in effect it's almost like you can't really come to the end of it. And it's always it's always mutating. So that's one thing. But the spiritual world is actually endless. And you reach one end or of some part of it, but there'll always be the next part and the next part. And it's literally endless. And it's like that. And there are aspects or sort of situations that we've never conceived of in this lifetime. Yeah. Prabhupada, you know, one thing I read, a devotee asked Prabhupada, there are 400,000 human species out of the 8,400,000, 400,000 human. So, devotee asked, how many do we see here on this planet? And Prabhupada answered, maybe 2,000. Then Prabhupada said, actually, maybe just 1,000. So that means, and that's our experience of the human species. And, you know, we see a variegatedness. But there are many different types of humans who we haven't had experience of. So it may not be endless, but it's a lot. But in the spiritual world, it's actually endless. Do you have a comment on that? No?
I've got a question from the internet.
Oh, okay. Haribol Internet. Welcome. Yes.
When the subtle body separated from the gross body, does the subtle body carry with it the lessons learned in that lifetime? And does the subtle body keep changing to absorb the learning, good or bad, from each lifetime? I mean, how does the new gross body understand what it is supposed to learn? Is that knowledge carried by the subtle body to the new gross body? Is that gross consciousness?
Yeah, I might have to read it. But, well, part of it was when you, as you, well, just a sec. As you go through things, the subtle body goes through experiences and learns things, right? And learns things. So are those lessons carried on? That's the essence of it, or that's part of it? And what was the rest? Well, let's just talk about that first. Yeah. Well, the answer would be yes, but the subtle body, being material, there's such a tendency to forget that you learn lessons and then you forget them. Like, you know, we've all learnt lessons. I see. Thank you, dear. Like, you know, you've all learnt Afrikaans, and I know that a lot of it has been forgotten. And I can tell you an interesting experience of mine. I've been studying Russian for quite some years, but I haven't been this year because of circumstances. And I've definitely forgotten some. So it's not just like you learn a lesson and you got it, and it's just imprinted into the subtle body, and you're never going to go against that again because you learnt, and that's a very important thing about the subtle body. Yeah, it's not like just an cumulative type of thing. And what's the next part?
How does the new gross body understand what it's supposed to learn?
How does the new gross body understand? Well, the new gross body doesn't really understand what it needs to learn. It's like the subtle body comes into the new gross body and sort of familiarizes itself with the new gross body, through the early days and then into youth and all that. And gradually as the gross body starts or matures, then the subtle body, because the subtle body, is full of desires to enjoy in that type of gross body. That's how he or she got that particular gross body, because of the specific desires and karma. But these karma and desires are very intricately linked. So the subtle body, as the gross body becomes more mature and like that, like into the 20s and approaching 30 and all that, then there's this tendency for them to really have a clear idea of what they've got to get themselves together in, a career of some sort and all that. So it's not quite the right question.
Kind of, but then there's a last part to it. Is this gross consciousness? Like whatever you can explain.
Is that gross consciousness?
Gross consciousness, subtle consciousness.
Have you got an answer for that? Swarup Damodar Prabhu will provide an answer.
The body, the gross body, doesn't have consciousness without the presence of the subtle body.
Yeah.
And doesn't have perception without the presence of the subtle
Yes.
body. So it's meaningless, the gross body, if not with the subtle body.
Yeah. The gross body is definitely meaningless without the subtle body. It's just a lump of matter. But, if you talk about gross consciousness as opposed to more subtle consciousness, you could say, it depends how you want to look at it, but you could say, that there's certain features of material consciousness which are fundamental and fundamentally exist in all species. I'm just trying to think of, what is it? In Gauranga Bolite Habe, Ar Kabe Nitai Chand, Karuna Hobe, Samsara Vasana. Yeah. Samsara Vasana more, Kabe Tucha Habe. So there, Narottam Das Thakur makes a type of distinction between what he calls samsara vasana, fundamental features of material consciousness, and more features which are to do with this lifetime. Yeah, like to identify with the body is a fundamental it's like, well, let's say fundamental feature of material consciousness. But to identify with which particular body, that changes from body to body. or the, that we've been discussing attraction to the opposite sex in at some length. So the tendency to become attracted is there in the human species, it's there in the Europeans, it's there in the Africans, it's there in the Indians, the Chinese, but it's there in all the species of animals and fish and so on. So it's a fundamental feature of material consciousness. But to be attracted to a particular category in the opposite sex, the humans, or whatever the species is, that's a more subtle type of, a more subtle manifestation of, the gross or the basic general tendency. How does that sound? I mean, that's true. That's true. It's very true. So Narottam Das Thakur is praying to Lord Nityananda that Arkabe Nitai Chand Karuna Hoibe, when will I know that I've got the mercy of Lord Nityananda? When samsara vasana more, kabe tucha habe, when my fundamental material consciousness becomes tucha, means just like it's nothing, then I'll know. Not just that when my tendency to be attracted to some particular version of some type of material pleasure has gone, but when the whole tendency to become attracted to that type of material pleasure in whatever manifestation, whatever species, when that's gone, samsara vasana more, kabe tucha habe, then I'll know that I got the mercy of Lord Nityananda. That in whatever species I'm put, I won't have that type of material attraction. Hare Krishna. Oh.
I think it is related to this excerpt you quoted from Narottam Das Thakur's song. I'm just striking how sometimes we think of Lord Nityananda's mercy as like just one of compassion, or it's like it renders you into this happy, blissful, mood of chanting and dancing. But it's such a scientific result, to understand that this material connection to this it's insignificant. It's tucha. It's gone. It's not just some sentimental feeling.
Right.
Happiness coming from Lord Nityananda. It's very scientific.
Yeah, that's a good point. The mercy of Lord Nityananda, there can easily be the tendency, I know there sometimes is, to just feel mercy of Lord Nityananda. Yeah, Hari Bol, we're in ecstasy. Jagai and Madai got delivered from being nasty people to being devotees. Great, which is great. But actually it's very deep. Really, the mercy of Lord Nityananda means to get extricated from material, at least one part of it, to become extricated from material existence in such a way that your whole tendency, proclivity for material life is eradicated. That's that's part of the mercy, and very scientific and deep. Oh, extremely deep. Yeah. Yes.
Maharaj, the body, the material body as is without the subtle body, and the soul is dead. So the pain we experience in the material body, would that be the subtle body that experiences the actual pain?
The soul is experiencing via, because of being attached to, identifying with, and then because of that being influenced by both the gross and subtle bodies. Yeah. Just like, an example, which is, it's a nice example. People watch movies. It's such a massive, massive industry, and the actors, they get paid, I don't know, more than perhaps anybody. I mean, really a lot. And all they do, the actors and actresses, they just become expert in acting as if they're in a reality of, whatever it is, some action drama, some romance, or some political something. They're acting. And they're so expert. And the whole get-up of the movies is so expert that the people go there and they're just drawn into it. And they feel the drama, when the hero's in danger. They feel the pain when, I remember actually when I was, I forget, 16 or 17 or 18, I went with my father to see Romeo and Juliet, the movie. I don't know if you ever saw that. Olivia Hussey is the very famous version. And when they kill themselves, we came out of the movie, my father was crying. Really. I wasn't crying, but I was deeply moved. But it's just a nonsense. It's a total nonsense. They never died. They never died. Actually, they never really existed in a sense, because they're just actors acting as if they're those people. So but people feel, and that's why they go to the movies. If the people didn't feel, they wouldn't go to the movies. There'd be no need or reason at all. But because it's like that and people become attached, and then they get all these experiences which affect them so deeply. So it's just illustrating, in a sense, the principle of our situation, as you're saying, in material life. And ultimately it's the soul who's suffering, although it's an illusory type of suffering. Yeah. And when the soul wakes up, then the soul will say, actually, this has got nothing to do with me. It's just in a state of confusion, I feel it has something to do with me. Therefore, I become affected. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.